and welcome to the Alabama Public Health Training Network. I'm William Kennedy, State Social Work Director at the Department of Public Health here in Alabama. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Ethics in a Post-COVID World, New Challenges and Familiar Solutions, Part 2. If you have a question about anything being discussed today, please call or email during our broadcast. The phone number and email are on your screen now and will appear again later in the program. Also, the handout, sign-in sheets, and evaluations are available online. I know we've had a couple of messages saying they weren't available earlier, but they are now available online. You'll need to register for this program in order to access those materials. Continuing education credits have been approved for nurses and social workers for this program. In order to receive credit for this training, you must watch the entire program, then complete and return the sign-in sheets and evaluation. While content may remain relevant for up to over 2 years, CE credits only awarded for 2 years for nurses and social workers, expiring on June 16th, 2024. If you are watching this program on demand and want to receive a social work CE certificate, you'll need to complete the social work test and send it in, along with your sign-in sheet and evaluation. If you're watching this program live, there is no social work test required. For social workers, if you're watching this program live, it qualifies for classroom hours, and if you're watching on demand, it's considered non-classroom hours. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our presenter today. James Sacco is a consultant with the Alabama Department of Public Health, and again, this is part 2 of a 2-part series on ethics. Jim, welcome back.
Great. Well, thank you. Good morning. Morning to everybody here in the room. Good morning to people watching on the video. I'm delighted to be back. For those of you watching, I guess, on demand, welcome back from 5 minutes ago. Hopefully they took a little bathroom break in between the 2 sessions. Today's topic piggybacks on last time. Yesterday, we talked about coming out of a post-COVID world, and what I stumbled over at the beginning, is it post-COVID or almost post-COVID or something? As the request came from the leadership team, it was, let's talk about ethics. And as I thought about it, I thought, let's all try to make sense of where we've been the last couple years since COVID, and try to remember what we've been through, and frame it through the discussion about ethical challenges. And I said yesterday morning, part of what guided me as I was doing the research for this series was to look at the NASW Code of Ethics and look at what had happened. And in 2021, there was 2 amendments to the NASW Code of Ethics. One that was about the importance of professional self-care for people in the field of social work, and that kind of drove the bus yesterday in terms of trying to think about the impact to all of us, psychosocial impact to patients, us, and then talked a good bit about virtual service delivery and the wacky changes we've made in a very short period of time. The second amendment to the NASW code that happened again was ratified in 2021, was an enhancement on the importance of cultural competence. And so today we are going to kind of roll up our sleeves, and as we think about what's not changed, we're going to talk a good bit about inequality, about social determinants of health, and about, in some ways, how, from my perspective, COVID and the post-COVID fallout has been instructive to us about the haves and the have-nots and the challenges all of us face. So that's me. I have a master's degree in social work from the University of Georgia. I always say mom and daddy bought a master's degree from Georgia. I give them credit. And a clinical social worker. Yesterday people asked about my background, and I was a real social worker doing all sorts of behavioral health stuff, and about 20 years ago I met some people who said, we need somebody with social work skills and we'll teach you how to be an educator. So this kind of unexpected career fork. I always say I'm usually in the basement of some county health department somewhere, having stopped at the Waffle House on my way there. And anyway, it's been an interesting ride, and I feel grateful for all the frontline public health people I've met. It's been an incredible career. So those are objectives today. My first objective is to keep you awake for 90 minutes. That's always critical, especially those, I guess to those watching on video, try to keep them off Zappos or Facebook or Instagram or the other tantalizing things other than me that are there on their computer. But really, we're going to talk about, again, yesterday we talked about challenges with telehealth. We talked about what happens when we go back into the reality. Today we really are talking about, as I said, the importance of understanding difference, of addressing diversity, and for all of us as nurses and social workers to be concerned about issues of inequity. So this slide's a repeat from yesterday. It's new to people who are just here for the first time. Cindy's just seen it for the first time. So again, what our code of values as social workers is about. And again, obviously, competence, but for today's training, what that also means is not just the ability to provide competent service, but if you drill down, what the code says is to provide services that are competent in respect to working around difference. And I've got language in an upcoming slide, but it's important. Obviously, competence as a social worker is important, but the standard goes on to talk about working with people around various diversity, and that's really, again, at the heart of why we're here, and I think it's at the heart of why NASW leadership said, let's really put some muscle behind the code of ethics and really reinforce the importance. Service to others, obviously, it's what we do. Social justice. I debated how far to go today, but we can't just talk about individual social work practice. And I think as social workers, we are charged to advocate. We are charged to think about social change. And in preparing for this workshop, I found myself just looking at inequity in this country around race, ethnicity, economics, rural versus urban. And, frankly, for me, it calls to mind the need for all of us who are social workers, and you'll see in just a minute the nursing code says the same thing, to think about the have-nots in our culture and to think about whether they are have-nots just because they are lazy or not deserving or not something enough, or if the system that we've created that people have been born into reinforces inequity. And I'm gonna start at 9:05 and say I think there's something about structural inequity that comes up for me as I prepared this, and I just want to name that. And if people want to tune out of the video, they can tune out now. But I think as social workers, and like I said, as nurses, we've got to think about these big issues and ask these hard questions. Dignity and worth of individuals is at the heart of what we do, the importance of human relationships. And integrity means acting, I think, in ways that are true to our professional guidelines, including the ethics. So yesterday I talked about the nursing ethics, and I hope I didn't offend any nurses. I got one in the room by saying I was a little surprised at how close the nursing code of ethics aligns with social work ethics. Protecting human rights, health diplomacy, reducing disparities right there in the ANA nursing provision. Principles of social justice right there in the main provisions. So everybody step back with me. Kind of think about where we've been, the state of the country. It's exhausting to do. I want to just say that sometimes it feels exhausting to look at where we're at as a nation, as a culture. And just think about these questions as you look at the globe, as you look at the great state of Alabama. Where are human rights concerned? Where do human rights concerns exist? Where do you see health disparities affecting Alabamians? And do you think there are issues, do you see issues of social injustice that we as nurses and social workers should be concerned about? Anything come to mind as I ask those very hard questions? I'll start. It's hard. These are tough questions. I'll start. Certainly, what we know is Alabama, like everywhere in the country, has poorer health outcomes for people of color. That if you look at cancer survival, hypertension, there are a number of diseases where the outcome in terms of life expectancy, quality of life is poorer for people of color in Alabama. Multiple health conditions where there are disparities around race, ethnicity. That's been true for a long time. The bad news is we've not closed that gap in the country. We've not closed that gap in Alabama. And so again, these questions of why disparities exist and the really thorny issues of what to do about it. What else do you see as issues of human rights, health disparities?
You know, here in Alabama, it's urban versus rural,
Yeah.
and so access to care
You bet.
is a huge issue, and it starts with at the earliest stages of life with access to the women that are pregnant and having health care
You bet.
during pregnancy, and goes all the way to the end of life.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so access to care versus rural versus is urban.
You bet. You bet. And I like what you're saying. You're a true social worker across the lifespan. From does an unborn baby get better or worse prenatal care up to end of life. And yeah, absolutely. That access to care, distance to services, absolutely an important concern for all of us. Other folks, where are issues of social justice and human rights in Alabama? Anybody have any thoughts?
To take it a step further, access to insurance.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
we see that across the state as well,
And-
in a variety of different professions that aren't covered, working 40 hours a week, but yet have no insurance or access to insurance.
Yeah.
And so very fortunate in Alabama. Our CHIP program have some of the highest percentages of children that have health care insurance, but our adults are lacking.
Yeah, yeah. And Bill, that's great. The difference between the haves and have-nots around health insurance access, I'm going to challenge everybody and take it a step further. What about income inequality? You know, the reality is that if we talk about people in the service industry, we're going to get there in just a minute, they are disproportionately disadvantaged and stuck. And the connection between level of education and opportunity and economics is a pervasive problem. Part of that rural-urban, part of that is just people get stuck in the social class they're in. And is that people are bad or lazy? I don't think so. It just means if you are born rich in this country, you are likely to stay rich and likely to have a lot of advantages. And if you are born poor in this country, yes, we all know somebody who rose out of it. And the deck is stacked against you for a number of reasons. If you look at the outcomes for people born into poverty, Cindy, am I lying? Send me home if I'm lying. You've seen it. That the reality is breaking the cycle because of a lot of, I believe, structural things is something that we just need to name. We just need to acknowledge part of this difficult conversation. Anybody else? Injustice, health disparities, human rights.
I mean, right now it's a hot topic, not just here, but everywhere. I think about the healthcare ban for trans kids.
Yeah. That the issues for LGBT people, trans kids, and you know, let's not let people use the bathroom they want and play sports the gender they want. A movement away from marriage equality. I think, I think we're in a bit of a backlash, and that, you know, I guess that's the nature of the political continuum, but that certainly I think for lesbian, gay, bi, trans kids, and I always think of a friend of mine who has an 11-year-old, set of 11-year-old twins, born 2 boys, now 1 boy and 1 trans female. And it's heartbreaking to think about a woman who loves both of her kids the same, who's doing what she can, but lives in a world where one of her kids faces a whole lot of barriers. You know, it's interesting because they're twins. You see the road of the cisgender boy having a pretty easy road, and you see the road for her trans daughter, and it's a lot different.
Our disabilities population.
Yeah, you bet.
We've done a lot of work with that population in the last couple of years, especially related to COVID and vaccines and access to care, and so transportation continues to be a huge issue. Housing continues to be a huge issue. That's accessible, affordable, and all of that kind of plays into healthcare.
Yeah, my sister works at a disability advocacy agency, and man, she'd fill up the hour, brother. I tell you what, with what's not right. That we've got ADA and we've made some strides, but her take on the world is there are structural disadvantages for people with disabilities. Folks, I'm going to name two that are hard to talk about. One is racism. And structural racism that exists across our country, and that I think is very difficult to dismantle. But I was thinking coming over here today that every single African American family I know has had to have a talk with their adolescent boys about how to act if they encounter law enforcement. And none of my white friends have ever had to have that conversation. I'm going to call that racism. And I'm going to just say if you were paying attention, we saw George Floyd murdered after he was captured. And it sort of reinforces the need to talk to young African American men about being careful. And the last one is about the right to vote. You know, this is America, and in your neighbor state, let's pick on Georgia. Why don't we pick on Georgia? Your neighbor state passed a law after making it illegal to give people water who are standing in line to vote. There's a law that makes it illegal to give people water because I believe there's something about who's voting, and a structural. I know because I know the voting sites in Georgia, having lived there 30 years. There's a structural way in which certain sites make voting easier, and certain sites make voting longer and harder, and that is about people of color and people who vote a certain party. I hope I'll be invited back to the Alabama Public Health Training Network. But if not, it's been a privilege, and I'm not doing my job if I don't ask these hard questions. So what we're getting at, and I do not have the answer, but as we talk about what's behind the NASW code enhancements, what I think should be challenged about as social workers and nurses wrestling with our ethics is this connection between political, social, and economic inequality. It's what we're dancing around here. The bill talked about people less insured. That's about the economics of that. You talk about people with disabilities. I promise you the vast majority of people with disabilities are in the bottom 20% of wage earning in the country. And so again, if you talk about what happens when you are in that lower socioeconomic status and who gets elected and what the cycle entails, there is just an increasing sense, I think, of pessimism among people who are lower socioeconomic, who are racial and ethnic minorities, who are sexual and gender non-conforming, that says the system doesn't work in their favor. Maybe the system is stacked against them. And again, I'm asking these hard questions. This is Yeshiva School of Social Work 2019 study, polled social workers. So if you hate social workers, blame social workers. I tend to think there's some smart ones. I got 6 smart ones here in the room, and asked what are the challenges that we social workers should be facing in terms of social justice. Voting rights was at the top in 2019. That this systematic way in which a number of states are trying to make voting harder. Systematic way in which a number of states are trying to make voting harder for, I think, people of color, poor people. It was the top top issue. Climate justice, which does have to do with poorer people, the people who are suffering, people who have more difficulty surviving issues of climate change tend to be poorer people of color. Access to health care bills on it. Refugee status. We didn't talk about a country where, the Statue of Liberty still says, give me you're tired, you're poor, I think. Thank heavens, because my grandpa came over when he was 1 year old. I guess I'd still be in Italy. On the other hand, maybe, it wouldn't be all bad being back in Italy. But it's a country that welcomed my grandfather in 1902. I'm not sure it's the same country. And it speaks to what our values are as a country. Do we still say that? Or is building the wall? Yes, I did. It's building the wall. Our priority: racial injustice, economic and gun violence. I do not. That's a whole other video conference for somebody smarter than me. But what do we do about living in a country where we seem to be accepting somehow that few mass shootings a month? I can't even count how many we've had. It's acceptable that that's okay. And then access to food and access to healthy food. I was down in, I say Mobile, but that makes it sound whatever. Bayou La Batre, where I was early in the week, which is different than Mobile, brother. I tell you what, they're still wrestling alligators down there in Bayou La Batre, and talked about life in food deserts and good people with the Wise Woman program trying to carry fresh vegetables to people in parts of the state where just having access because they're in a food desert is harder. So all kinds of reasons. Let me pause. Questions, comment. There's a slide somewhere you have the ability, if you're watching on demand, excuse me, to send questions or comment through the email address. You can call in directly. In the room, comments. If I'm off base, please jump in and let me know. Any comment, any questions? I need a drink of water.
I thought it was interesting that it's 2019, your list there, and I would dare say that all of those are still in the top however many you had there, but I would dare say that they've probably shifted some. Gun violence has really been a topic in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months. Food scarcity continues to be an increase there. But all of them are still still very relevant.
What I'm looking back at the slide. What things have changed as a result of the events of the last 3 years, and what things might have shifted as a result of COVID.
Right.
I would imagine it's still the same 8, but I think you're right. I think there probably have been some changes. And so as I said, the reason we're here, the reason why this topic of diversity and understanding how to respond to cultural differences is important is our professions tell us that this is an ethical issue. I said this 2021 update to the NASW code talks about our need to develop knowledge that guides our practice. And again, taking action, this last line, it feels like a lot. I'm just going to keep it real. It's like, I don't know y'all, but it seems like, boy, if I just fill out my paperwork by 4:45, it's a good day. But oh wait, you can't just fill out your paperwork. Make sure you address oppression, racism, discrimination, inequities, and acknowledge your personal privilege before you punch out for the day. I do think, again, what I learned in social work school early on was we are charged to advocates for people who are have-nots. It's the reason why I didn't get a degree in counseling or some of the other professions. Social work felt right to me because I do think, and people ask me where I learned it, and I really credit my parents who were not showy about it, but who lived a moral life, who were people. Mother was a nurse. My parents were churchgoers, and they taught us something about the obligation of caring for people who were not as privileged as we were. And so I can't do these things all the time, but I like the idea that our profession says, hey, we have to look at these really scary things. We have to be willing to do that. And then obtaining education. You're here, not only do you get CEUs, but you get to check off this box. You are obtaining to understand the nature of social diversity and oppression. And again, this cycle of social, political, economic with regard to race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender, identity, or expression, age. Nobody talked about how hard it is to be old, Bill. I tell you what, I got achy bones here and there. Talk about the economics of our elders. I mean, that's a whole other class, buddy. You could do 90 minutes just talking about what it's like. And again, talk about, what COVID showed us, not only the disproportionate impact, but the lives of some seniors are pretty troubling in the richest country in the world that we've got. Older people living the way they live. Political beliefs, marital status, immigrant, mental and physical ability, to Bill's point. So again, the code challenges, the update says demonstrate understanding of the nature of diversity and understanding the oppression that people with those differences face, and aware of cultural and socioeconomic differences among clients who use and access electronic technology. Yesterday, we talked about technology, and what we sort of touched on, but we didn't say out loud, is everybody doesn't have the latest version of the iPhone, y'all. And if we talk about who was able to jump into the telehealth world and do that more easily, and able to use technology to keep appointments or stay on their psychiatric medication or whatever else, again, I would argue that there are people who had some advantages, economic advantages, who were more able to jump into the electronic age with us than those who did not. I don't know. I've not tried it, but I'm assuming trying to get onto Zoom with your flip phone, track phone, burner phone that you got for $89 at the corner gas station, probably not as successful connecting as the latest, smartest version of the iPhone, Samsung, something or other. Social workers assessing issues that affect the delivery of these services. And I think we touched on this yesterday. Please.
Yeah, so we talked about, just earlier we were talking about barriers, and so that rural barrier, often our rural communities, the broadband is just not what it is in the urban, and so we talk about the potential for telehealth, telemedicine, but access to care includes lack of broadband, so that you actually have access to great hospital, UAB in Birmingham, world-renowned, great doctors there, and yet here just a couple of hours away, trying to get access to those doctors is a challenge.
It's a great, thank you, Bill. It's a great story, and I wish I remembered the county. You guys may know, but it was a story. It was on the national news, the Washington Post, probably. That's what I read. But a woman in, down Selma Way, somewhere down there, drive an hour and a half out there around COVID vaccination. She was like, people are not going to be checking their email and their website down here. So what she did is she set up a text network, and she was advocating, I'm going to say this name because it's at the Dollar General. She was doing a health advocacy thing at the Dollar General, because she said people are going to be at the Dollar General and they may not get their email, and they may not be tapped into adph.org, but I'm going to find them at the whatever. And she was encouraging vaccination and she was not employed by ADPH. She was just a concerned community member who said, if I'm going to keep these people alive in my community, I'm going to work the Dollar General and work the parking lot here and tell them where they go. And some county health department set up some outreach and was doing some vaccine. Anybody know the county I'm talking about? Like I said, I'm embarrassed that I don't, but it was just one of those great stories.
It was over in the Marengo Greene County area, Sumter County,
but
somewhere.
Just one of those things of like, man, that's that's how it ought to be. That's what we need to
And
do.
we also saw it down in the Bayou La Battery area. The health clinic down there was really pushing the vaccine, and so we saw some good numbers there.
Addressing those barriers. Again, I was training early in the week. I said, well, yeah, great, you got me an appointment. Let's use UAB. You got me an appointment 2.5 hours away at UAB or however far I live, and it's the 27th of the month, and we got $4.75 left, and I got kids to feed and $4. And well, yeah, it'd be great if I went to that specialty appointment down there at UAB, but parking is $3, and there's no gas in the truck, and and again, for those of us that are able to jump in the car, jump in our SUV and drive over to wherever they want to make an appointment for us is a different world. So how do we know we're doing our job well? Again, this is back to the NASW code and our guidance. And again, I think it aligns nicely with what nurses have been told. It starts with self-awareness. And I really, as I read the guidance, I thought, again, I was glad to be a social worker. And I thought, you can't really come to this without saying what's my history. Sometimes when I teach a whole day, what I say is remember the ghosts in your life. What did your grandparents tell you? What did your parents tell you? What has your life experience told you about people like you, about people different than you? And so just sort of acknowledging, and I think to do that without judgment. One of the things that happens in this conversation is people can be divisive and say good or bad, or your beliefs are good or bad. I think this self-examination comes with the best form of the self-examination is just to be curious, to sort of understand your grandparents came with their own biases from their parents and their grandparents, but we take it with, we bring it with us, I think, particularly if we haven't examined it and decided. Being aware of privilege and power, and I got that early on in school. I'm glad to report that in my preparation, there was talk about remembering the power imbalance, and we forget that because most of us don't come to social work or nursing on a power trip, but the fact that we have a diploma, that we have plastic tags around our necks, that we're perceived as the expert, inherently sets up a kind of power dynamic. And the fact that we did sleep indoors last night, that we do have access to food or health insurance or whatever advantages we have, those issues of power and privilege are things for us to acknowledge, again, not from a lens of sort of self-flagellation, but just to say, as I prepare to best meet the needs of these clients who are different than myself, who have these barriers to service, I think it's really important to kind of say there's some really powerful differences to acknowledge. So doing our work to develop knowledge of history, traditions, values of others, I think what's really important is that we do that in ways where we're not exclusively reliant on our consumers to do that for us. The criticism is, yeah, if you're in a session with somebody and want to say, hey, help me understand the values of Hmong families, let's go back to South Alabama and help me understand how people from Laos or Cambodia think or feel. But that ultimately the work really is for us to do the work on our own, and the burden becomes us as nurses and social workers getting educated and not relying on our racial ethnic minorities, our refugee, our people of color, our gender non-conforming. We're doing that work ourselves. We're getting education where we're doing the work to get there. Use a broad range of skills to demonstrate the importance of culture. Knowledgeable and skillful in our use of services, resources, and institutions available to serve multicultural communities. I mean, again, we do some self-reflection, we gather information about working with people who are diverse populations, and then we act in ways that are appropriate.